After retiring, I finally bought a cozy cabin in Colorado to enjoy peace and quiet in the mountains. Then my son-in-law stormed onto my deck and yelled, "My parents are moving in here. Don't like it? Then get the hell out of your own house." I just smiled and said nothing. When they arrived and started acting like they owned the place, I was already preparing. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Walter Harrison. I'm 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I thought I'd found peace. After 42 years of designing buildings for other people, I finally designed something for myself. A cozy cabin in the Colorado mountains, nestled in Breckenridge where the air is clean, and the only deadlines are sunset and sunrise. Cost me $847,000, every penny from selling my Denver house and a lifetime of savings. Worth it, I thought, or so I believed. I'm not a complicated man. I like simple things. Good coffee, handcrafted furniture, the sound of blue jays in the morning. My workshop smells like pine and varnish, and that's exactly how I want to spend my retirement. Building things with my hands, watching the mountains change colors with the seasons. No stress, no pressure, no people telling me what to do. But I should have known better. Family has a way of finding you, even when you're hiding at 9,000 feet. My daughter Danielle, she wasn't always like this. I remember when she was 7, running to meet me after work, her pigtails bouncing, asking if I'd help her build a birdhouse for the sparrows in our backyard. We spent that whole Saturday in my garage, her tiny hands struggling with the hammer, me guiding her through every nail. She smiled so bright when we hung it up. "We're a team, Daddy," she said. That girl is gone. The change started 3 years ago when she met Trevor Cooper at some charity gala in Denver. He's an architect too, works at Alpine Design Group, one of those prestigious firms that handles commercial buildings and expensive mountain estates. Makes $156,000 a year, drives a BMW, wears suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, comes from old money, the kind where his parents have a wine cellar worth more than most people's retirement funds. At first, I was happy for her. She seemed excited, alive. But Trevor had other plans for my daughter. Within 6 months, she started correcting my grammar at dinner, started wearing clothes with designer labels, talking about networking and social circles, started looking at my hand-built furniture like it embarrassed her. The wedding was nice, I'll give him that. I paid for most of it, $43,000 from my savings. Trevor's parents, Richard and Patricia Cooper, barely acknowledged my contribution. Patricia actually said, "How quaint, the father paying for the wedding. So traditional. Like it was something from a museum, not a father's love." But I smiled. I always smile. The week after I moved into my cabin, they showed up. "Just for the weekend," Danielle said on the phone. "Trevor wants to see your place." I should have known something was wrong when they arrived. Trevor walked through my cabin like a building inspector, running his fingers along the woodwork I'd spent months perfecting, checking corners, examining joints, not admiring, evaluating. Danielle followed him quiet, her eyes avoiding mine. That evening I made dinner. Nothing fancy, grilled steaks, roasted potatoes, fresh salad. We sat on my deck overlooking the mountains, the sunset painting everything gold and purple. For a moment I thought maybe this would be okay. Maybe we could connect. Then Trevor cleared his throat. "Walter," he said, setting down his wineglass. "Not Dad. Never Dad. We need to discuss something important." I waited, knife and fork in hand. "My parents are relocating from California. They need a place to stay for several months. You know, transitional period. Finding the right property. That sort of thing." He gestured around my deck like he was presenting evidence in court. "Your cabin is perfect. They'll move in 3 weeks from now." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Trevor, this is my retirement home. I bought this for peace and quiet, not—" "They're family," Danielle interrupted, her voice sharp. "Family helps family, Dad." I looked at her, really looked at her. The girl who built birdhouses with me wouldn't have said that with such coldness in her voice. "I understand that," I said slowly, "but this is my personal space. I moved here to—" Trevor's fist hit the table. My coffee cup rattled. "Listen to me carefully," he said, leaning forward. His face was red, veins standing out on his neck. My parents are moving here. They need this place. It's not a request, Walter. It's happening. Trevor, I don't think that's... My parents are moving here. He was shouting now, standing up, looming over the table. You got that? Not a discussion. They arrive April 15th. Don't like it? Then get out. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Danielle sat frozen, her eyes on her plate. She didn't defend me. Didn't tell her husband to calm down. Didn't acknowledge that he'd just told her father to get out of his own home. I looked at Trevor's red face, at my daughter's bowed head, at the mountains beyond that suddenly seemed very far away. Something broke inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet snap, like a thread giving way. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile I used to give contractors who tried to cheat on building codes. The smile that said I knew exactly what game we were playing. All right, I said softly. Whatever you say, Trevor. He blinked, confused by my capitulation. What? I said, all right. Your parents can stay here. I'll make arrangements. Danielle's head snapped up, surprise flickering across her face. Trevor looked suspicious for a moment, then satisfied. He'd won. Of course he had. Old man Walter, always rolling over, always accommodating. Good, Trevor said, sitting back down. I knew you'd see reason. Family first, right? Right, I echoed. Family first. The rest of dinner passed in awkward silence. They left the next morning, Trevor practically bouncing with satisfaction, Danielle giving me a weak hug that felt like an apology she didn't have the courage to say out loud. I stood on my deck, watching their car disappear down the mountain road. Then I went inside, poured myself a bourbon, and started planning. The morning after they left, I sat on my deck with coffee, watching blue jays fight over the feeder I'd built last month. The mountains were still beautiful, the air was still clean, but something had changed, or maybe I had. I kept thinking about Danielle's face at that table, the way she looked down, the way she said nothing when her husband screamed at her father. When did that happen? When did my daughter become someone who let her husband treat me like dirt? I remembered another dinner, years ago. Danielle was 16. Her boyfriend at the time, what was his name? Jason, made some snide comment about my truck being old. Before I could respond, Danielle stood up and told him to leave. That's my dad you're insulting, she'd said, fierce as a wildcat. Get out of our house. She'd defended me without hesitation. What happened to that girl? I knew what happened. Trevor happened. 3 years of being told her background wasn't good enough, her father wasn't sophisticated enough, her childhood home wasn't impressive enough. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one making her doubt herself a little more. And now here we were, her husband screaming at me in my own home, and her sitting silent. I spent that whole day thinking. By evening, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to roll over, not this time. But I wasn't going to fight dirty either. I've been in this profession long enough to know that the best revenge is completely legal. The next morning, I drove to Denver. It took me about 2 hours, winding down mountain roads, past ski resorts and tourist traps. Denver felt too loud after a week in Breckenridge. Too many people rushing around like ants. I found David Stewart's office in a building downtown. We'd worked together on a mixed-use development project about 8 years back. He'd handled all the property law aspects while I designed the structure. Good guy, sharp mind, didn't try to overcomplicate things for the sake of billing more hours. Walter Harrison, he said, standing up to shake my hand. Didn't expect to hear from you. Thought you were enjoying retirement. Was enjoying it, I said, until my son-in-law decided to redecorate. I laid out the situation. David listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled, his expression neutral. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Let me get this straight, he said. Your son-in-law wants to install his parents in your cabin, which you own outright. He screamed at you to get out if you didn't like it, and your daughter said nothing. That's the summary. You have the deed in your name only? Yes. Any informal agreements? Verbal promises? Anything he could claim? Nothing. I bought it with my own money after selling my Denver house. Clean title. David nodded slowly. Here's what I think is happening. Trevor has a legal education, right? Worked as a lawyer before switching to architecture? That's what Danielle told me. Then he knows enough to be dangerous. My guess? He's planning to establish his parents as long-term guests, then claim some form of adverse possession or tenant rights. Get them entrenched enough that evicting them becomes a nightmare. Meanwhile, he'll pressure you to sign over partial ownership, or at minimum, give him power of attorney for property decisions. The cold feeling in my chest spread. Can he do that? If you let him. But Walter, you still own that property. You have options. David pulled out a legal pad. Here's what I'd recommend. You create an LLC, a limited liability company, for property management. Transfer the cabin's ownership to the LLC. You're the sole owner of the LLC, so you still control everything, but now you have corporate protection. And that helps me how? Because now your cabin isn't your personal residence. It's a business asset. And if Trevor's parents want to stay there, they're not family guests. They're tenants. With a rental agreement, with rules, with consequences for violations. I felt something shift in my chest. Not warm exactly, but sharp. Focused. What kind of consequences? David smiled. Not a nice smile. That depends on what you want to achieve. We spent the next hour going over details. LLC formation costs, rental agreement templates, Colorado short-term rental laws. When I left his office, I'd paid him $5,000 as a retainer and asked him to have everything ready in 2 weeks. Driving back to Breckenridge, I thought about that birdhouse again. Danielle and me in the garage, her small hands on the hammer. We're a team, Daddy. Maybe we could be again. But first, she needed to see who she'd married, what he was willing to do to her father. And Trevor needed to learn something my father taught me when I was young. Never mistake kindness for weakness. I spent the next 2 weeks working, not on furniture, on documentation. I photographed every corner of my cabin, every piece of handcrafted furniture, every custom detail, every valuable item. I created spreadsheets listing everything with estimated replacement costs. Then I installed cameras, not obvious ones. Small, discreet security cameras in the living room, kitchen, deck, and guest bedrooms. Completely legal in Colorado, as long as they're in common areas, not bathrooms or private sleeping quarters. I also called an old colleague from the Denver architectural community. We'd worked on several projects together back in the 90s. Over coffee, he mentioned something interesting. Did you hear about Alpine Design Group? Bob Dennis is finally selling. Wants to retire, move to Arizona. Alpine Design Group, where Trevor worked, where Trevor earned $156,000 a year as a senior architect. What's he asking? I asked casually. $2.3 million. Good client list, solid reputation, profitable. He wants someone who'll maintain the company's standards. I went home that night and looked at my finances, my retirement accounts, my stocks and bonds, the equity in my cabin. An idea was forming, a very interesting idea. When David called with the LLC paperwork ready, I had him add one more thing to our plan, a separate LLC for potential business acquisitions. Planning to invest in something? He asked. Maybe, I said, just keeping my options open. 2 weeks after Trevor's ultimatum, I sent him an email. Polite, professional. Attached was a rental agreement for my cabin, prepared by David, ironclad and comprehensive. My phone rang 30 seconds later. "What the hell is this?" Trevor shouted. I smiled at the mountains, watching the blue jays at their feeder. "That's a standard rental agreement," I said calmly. "Since your parents are staying at my property, we should have everything documented properly. For everyone's protection. This is ridiculous. She's your daughter." "Exactly. Which is why I'm giving your parents an excellent rate. $800 a month instead of the market rate of $4,500. Family discount." I could hear him breathing heavily. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." "Have them sign it when they arrive. I'll need first month's rent and deposit. Everything's explained in the contract." "We'll see about that," he said, and hung up. I sat there holding my phone, looking at my cabin, my beautiful, peaceful cabin, and thought about what was coming. Trevor thought he'd won, thought he'd intimidated the old man into submission. He had no idea what he'd started. The game was on, and I'd been playing it a lot longer than he had. The next 2 weeks passed like watching a masterclass in entitlement unfold. David and I moved fast. Harrison Mountain Retreats, LLC, became official 3 days after Trevor's angry phone call. The paperwork transferring my cabin to the company took another week. All perfectly legal, all meticulously documented. I also brought in Marcus Wade, a real estate agent who specialized in luxury vacation rentals in Summit County. Marcus was all business, no personal connection, which was exactly what I needed. He reviewed comparable properties and confirmed what I already knew. My cabin could easily fetch $4,500 a month on the short-term market. $800 was practically charity. "You're giving them a steal," Marcus said, reviewing the rental agreement David had drafted. "But these penalty clauses, they're aggressive. Legal, but aggressive." "They need to be," I said simply. The contract was 12 pages long. No smoking anywhere on the property. Quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Maximum 4 occupants at any time. No rearranging furniture, no unauthorized guests. Each violation carried escalating penalties. $500 for the first offense, $1,000 for the second, $2,500 for the third, plus immediate eviction rights. Trevor signed it. He had to. Because the alternative was explaining to his parents why they couldn't use his father-in-law's cabin after all. And that would mean admitting he didn't have the control he'd promised them. I watched the signed contract come through via email, and something in me shifted. Not satisfaction exactly. More like clarity. I'd spent my whole career reading blueprints, understanding load-bearing structures, knowing exactly where pressure points would fail. This was no different. Trevor thought he was dealing with an old man who'd cave. He was actually dealing with someone who understood exactly how much weight his little empire could bear before it collapsed. The morning Trevor's parents were due to arrive, I walked through my cabin one last time as just mine. I ran my hand along the dining table I'd built from reclaimed barnwood, checked the cameras one more time. All recording, all feeding to secure cloud storage. Everything was ready. I thought about calling Danielle. Wanted to hear her voice, maybe warn her that things were about to get complicated. But what would I say? "Your husband's making a mistake, and I'm going to let him learn the hard way." She'd chosen her side at that dinner table when she stayed silent, so I said nothing. Richard and Patricia Cooper arrived right on schedule. I heard their Mercedes SUV crunching up my gravel driveway before I saw it. One of those massive vehicles that cost more than some people's annual salary. Richard was driving, Patricia in the passenger seat, both of them wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. I met them at the door with a smile, the same smile I'd given Trevor. "Richard, Patricia, welcome to Breckenridge." Richard barely glanced at me as he climbed out, his eyes already scanning the cabin with that same evaluating look Trevor had used. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of tan that comes from country club golf, not mountain hiking. His handshake was firm and brief, the kind that says, "I'm important, and we both know it." "Not bad for your situation," Richard said, gesturing vaguely at my cabin. "We're used to something more upscale, of course, but it'll do for the interim." Patricia emerged from the passenger side like she was stepping onto a red carpet. Mid-60s, blonde hair that owed more to her hairdresser than genetics, wearing clothes that screamed expensive in that quiet way only true money manages. She looked at my handcrafted porch railing and actually wrinkled her nose. "Rustic," she said, not as a compliment. I kept smiling. "Let me show you around." I gave them the full tour, pointing out everything as if they were valued guests instead of people who'd basically forced their way into my home. The kitchen with its custom cabinets, the living room with its stone fireplace and the furniture I'd built myself, the guest bedrooms with mountain views that people paid premium prices to wake up to. Patricia touched things like they might be contaminated. Richard kept making comments. "This is handmade? How quaint. Only 3 bedrooms? We have 5 in our Malibu house. Is that wood stain original? Looks dated." Every comment was designed to diminish, to make me feel small in my own space. I absorbed it all, saying nothing, watching everything. When the tour finished, I handed them a folder. Inside was their copy of the rental agreement, the house rules printed on heavy cardstock, emergency contact numbers, and a detailed inventory of every item in the cabin with its estimated value. "What's all this?" Richard asked, flipping through it dismissively. Your rental agreement and house guidelines, I said pleasantly. Everything you and Trevor signed off on, just so we're all clear on expectations. Richard laughed, actually laughed. Walter, we're family. We don't need all this bureaucratic nonsense. That's exactly why we need it, I said, my smile never wavering. Clear expectations prevent misunderstandings. Protects everyone. Patricia was already wandering toward the guest bedroom, phone in hand, probably texting Trevor about how adequate the accommodations were. Well, Richard said, tossing the folder onto my dining table without looking at it again, I'm sure it'll be fine. We're not difficult people. I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the same entitled certainty I'd seen in Trevor's eyes that night at dinner, the absolute conviction that rules were for other people. I'm sure it will be, I said. They settled in that afternoon while I retreated to my workshop, which I'd specifically excluded from the rental agreement. It was my space, 20 feet from the main cabin, where I kept my tools and works in progress. Through the window I could see Richard on the deck, cigar in hand, smoke drifting across the mountain air. The no-smoking rule was Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the agreement. I pulled up the camera feeds on my tablet. Crystal clear footage of Richard lighting up, Patricia rearranging my furniture in the living room, moving my handmade coffee table to make room for their own decorative items they'd brought. That was violation number 2. I watched, documented, said nothing. That evening they had friends over. I counted 6 people on the deck, laughing, drinking, music playing until nearly 11 p.m. Maximum occupancy was 4. Quiet hours started at 10. Violations 3, 4, and 5. I sat in my workshop, camera feeds running, making notes with timestamps. Each violation carefully documented, each one building my case. Richard called Trevor that night. I didn't need to bug the place to know what he was saying. I could see him through the window, pacing, animated, probably complaining about the ridiculous contract and the uptight old man. Let him complain. A week passed. The violations accumulated like snow in a Colorado winter, steady, inevitable, mounting. More smoking, more noise violations, more unauthorized guests. Patricia complained to Trevor that my furniture was depressing, and could they please replace it with something more suitable? Richard told his friends at some dinner party that they were slumming it in the mountains, while their real estate situation got sorted. I documented everything. Then I had David send the letter. It arrived via certified mail, which Richard had to sign for. I watched from my workshop window as he tore open the envelope, read the contents, and his face went from confusion to red-faced fury in about 3 seconds. Official notice from David Stewart, attorney at law, on behalf of Harrison Mountain Retreats, LLC. Detailed list of violations: smoking, noise complaints, unauthorized guests, furniture relocation, total penalties owed, $2,000, payment due within 7 days. Richard's voice carried across the mountain air when he called Trevor. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The tone said everything. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Trevor, predictably. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. No greeting, no pretense of civility. $2,000? For what? My parents breathing wrong? I was at my workbench, sanding a wooden box I was making for my tools. Didn't stop working. For violating the rental agreement, I said calmly. Section 3 covers smoking, clearly violated multiple times. Section 7 covers noise and quiet hours. Section 5 covers guest limitations. It's all documented. This is insane. They're family. They're tenants who signed a contract you reviewed and approved, if I recall correctly. Nobody takes that contract seriously. I stopped sanding, set down my sandpaper carefully. The law takes it seriously, Trevor. You're a lawyer by training. You understand how contracts work. Silence on the other end. I could practically hear his teeth grinding. You're doing this to get back at me. I'm enforcing a legal agreement. If you have a problem with that, feel free to consult your own attorney. We'll see about this, he said, and the line went dead. I went back to sanding my box, the rhythmic motion soothing. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful evening. Beautiful timing. And the best part, this was just the opening move. Trevor showed up 3 days later. I was in my workshop when I heard his BMW pull up, tires crunching on gravel with more force than necessary. Through the window, I watched him slam the car door, march toward the main cabin where his parents were staying, his whole body radiating anger. I kept working on my project. A jewelry box for... Well, I hadn't decided who it was for yet. Maybe no one. Maybe just for the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands, while everything else fell apart around me. 20 minutes later, Trevor appeared at my workshop door. Didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place. His face was flushed, his expensive suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened. He looked like a man who was used to winning arguments and couldn't understand why this one wasn't going his way. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't look up from my sanding. "I'm listening." "This contract nonsense has to stop. My parents are not paying $2,000 for living in a house." "For violating a rental agreement," I corrected, still focused on the wood grain. "There's a difference." "Walter..." He stepped closer to my workbench. I could smell his cologne. Expensive, aggressive. "You're being ridiculous. This is my daughter's father we're talking about. This is family." Now I looked up, met his eyes. "Is it? Because when you screamed at me to get out of my own home, that didn't feel like family. When Danielle sat silent while you disrespected me at my own dinner table, that didn't feel like family." His jaw clenched. "That was... You're twisting things." "No, Trevor. I'm clarifying them. You wanted your parents to use my property. I made that possible, with very reasonable terms and very generous pricing. $800 a month when I could get $4,500 on the open market. That's family. The rules, that's just common sense. Nobody follows those rules that strictly. I do. This is my property, managed through my LLC, and every tenant, family or otherwise, follows the same rules." I went back to my sanding. "You're a smart man. You understand liability, property law, tenant rights. You know I'm within my rights. You're doing this to punish me. I'm doing this to protect my investment." I blew sawdust off the box lid. "But here's the interesting thing, Trevor. If you and your parents had just shown a little respect, just a basic level of human decency, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But you couldn't even manage that." He stood there, breathing hard, fists clenched at his sides. I could see him working through options, running scenarios, trying to find an angle. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll pay your petty fines, but this isn't over." "I didn't think it was," I said calmly. He left without another word, the workshop door banging shut behind him. I sat there for a long moment, looking at the jewelry box in my hands. Something Danielle said when she was young echoed in my mind. "Daddy, why do you spend so much time making things perfect?" "Because," I told her, "if you're going to do something, you should do it right. No shortcuts, no compromises." She'd learned that lesson once. Maybe she'd remember it again. That evening I made myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and vegetables, and sat on my porch, the one part of my property I'd kept access to in the rental agreement. I could hear Richard and Patricia inside, their voices carrying through the open windows. Absolutely humiliating. Who does he think he is? Trevor needs to handle this. I ate slowly, watching the stars come out over the mountains. My phone buzzed, a text from Danielle. "Dad, please, this is getting out of hand. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, typed several responses, deleted them all. Finally settled on, "When you're ready to really talk, you know where to find me." She didn't reply. The next week I drove back to Denver, had some business to attend to. Met with Marcus Wade again to discuss the rental market. Made sure my documentation was absolutely airtight. Then I had a meeting that Trevor didn't know about. Coffee with my old colleague from the architectural community. The one who'd mentioned Alpine Design Group was for sale. His name was Frank Hutchins, and we'd worked together on maybe a dozen projects over the years. Good architect, better businessman. "So you're serious about this?" Frank asked, stirring his coffee. "You're actually considering buying Bob Dennis's firm?" "I'm considering a lot of things," I said. "Tell me more about the financials." Frank laid it out. Alpine Design Group was profitable. Solid client base, good reputation, talented staff. Bob Dennis was 71 and wanted to retire to Arizona, spend time with his grandkids. He was asking 2.3 million, but Frank thought he'd take 2.1 from the right buyer. The right buyer being someone who knows the business, Frank said, someone with credibility in the community, someone who wouldn't gut the company and flip it. Someone like me? I said. Someone exactly like you. Frank leaned back. Walter, you've got 42 years in this business. People respect you. Bob would love to sell to you. He's mentioned you before, actually. Said you were one of the best he'd ever worked with. I thought about my finances. My retirement accounts held $890,000. My stocks and bonds were worth another $650,000. The cabin I'd just bought for $847,000 was now worth maybe $900,000 in the current market. I could borrow against it, maybe $560,000 at reasonable rates. The math worked, barely. It would use every resource I had, put me in debt, risk everything. But the look on Trevor's face when he found out his father-in-law owned the company he worked for, the company where he made $156,000 a year as a senior architect, that would be priceless. Set up a meeting with Bob, I told Frank. Discreet. I want to discuss terms. You sure about this? It's a big move for a retired guy. I smiled. Who said anything about retirement? Over the next few days, I had several conversations with Bob Dennis. Turned out we got along well. Two old architects who understood that buildings were more than just structures. They were legacy. Bob liked my vision for the company. Liked that I wanted to preserve what he'd built, rather than strip it for parts. We agreed on $2.1 million. I'd bring my expertise as a consultant for the first year, which made Bob more comfortable and saved me $100,000 on the price. I arranged financing through my bank, liquidated my stock portfolio, started the paperwork to take out a line of credit against my cabin. David Stewart handled all the legal work. He was earning every penny of that retainer. This is aggressive, David said during one of our meetings. You're leveraging everything. I know. If anything goes wrong, it won't. Walter, I have to ask, is this about revenge? Because mixing business with personal? It's about investment, I interrupted. Alpine Design Group is a good company with solid fundamentals. It's a smart business move. David looked at me skeptically. And the fact that your son-in-law works there is a complication I'm prepared to manage professionally? He didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue, just went back to drafting contracts. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Richard and Patricia were proving to be exactly as bad as I'd anticipated. More violations, more complaints, more entitled behavior that they seemed to think was their birthright. They damaged a cabinet I'd built, an antique piece made from wood I'd salvaged from an old barn, worth about $1,500 in materials and labor. Patricia claimed it was an accident when she bumped it while rearranging. I documented it, added it to the growing list. David sent another letter. Total penalties now, $4,300. Richard called me directly this time. No Trevor as intermediary. This is extortion, he shouted into the phone. No, I said calmly. Extortion is illegal. This is contract enforcement. There's a difference. We're not paying a dime. That's your choice. But the contract has provisions for non-payment, including eviction and legal action. You wouldn't dare. Danielle would never forgive you. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Richard, you're welcome to test that theory, but I'd suggest reading Section 12 of your rental agreement, the part about dispute resolution and legal fees. He hung up on me. I sat on my porch, phone in hand, looking at the mountains that had brought me so much peace such a short time ago. Danielle called an hour later, crying. Dad, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to us? That hurt, more than I wanted to admit. Danielle, when Trevor told me to get out of my own home, where were you? Silence. When he screamed at me across my dinner table, what did you do? Dad, you sat there, silent. You chose his side without a word. He's my husband, and I'm your father, the one who raised you, paid for your education, walked you down the aisle, the one who taught you that respect matters, that integrity matters. This isn't about respect. This is about you being petty. No, I said quietly. This is about me refusing to be treated like dirt in my own home. This is about consequences. Actions have consequences, Danielle. Trevor's learning that. Maybe you need to learn it too." She hung up without another word. I sat there in the gathering darkness, feeling older than my 68 years, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Then I thought about Trevor's face that night, the contempt, the certainty that he could push me around. I thought about Richard and Patricia, treating my home like a second-rate hotel, dismissing my craftsmanship, my life's work, as rustic and dated. I thought about Danielle's silence, and I knew exactly what I was doing. The cabin situation would resolve itself. Either they'd pay up and move out, or I'd take them to court and force them out. David was already preparing the paperwork, but the Alpine Design Group acquisition, that was different. That was checkmate. Trevor had no idea it was coming. None of them did. They thought they were dealing with a broken old man who'd quietly accept whatever scraps of dignity they allowed him. They were wrong. The meeting with Bob Dennis was set for the following week. The financing was approved. The lawyers were ready. I stood on my porch, looking at the stars over the mountains, and smiled. Not a happy smile, a patient one, the kind of smile a predator wears when the prey finally wanders into the trap. And that's when I understood exactly how to repay them. The meeting with Bob Dennis happened the following week at a quiet restaurant in downtown Denver, the kind of place where business deals happen over perfectly aged steaks and scotch old enough to vote. Bob was already there when I arrived, a distinguished man with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd built something he was proud of. "Walter," he said, standing to shake my hand, "Frank told me you were interested. I have to admit, I'm intrigued." We spent the first hour talking architecture. Not business, just the craft we both loved. The way a building's bones tell a story. The satisfaction of seeing something you designed stand for decades. The responsibility of creating spaces where people live their lives. Then we talked business. "Frank said you might be interested in Alpine Design Group," Bob said, swirling his scotch. "Can I ask why? You just retired." I chose my words carefully. I thought I wanted retirement. Turns out what I wanted was freedom. Freedom to choose my projects, work at my own pace, build something meaningful. Your firm has that reputation. Quality over quantity. Relationships over transactions. Bob nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I built. But I'm tired, Walter. 71 is too old to keep up with demanding clients and tight deadlines. My grandkids are in Arizona. My wife wants me there. But I don't want to sell to some corporate entity that'll strip the company for parts." "I wouldn't do that." "No," Bob said, studying me. "I don't think you would. Frank speaks highly of you. Says you're one of the most principled architects he's worked with." We talked numbers. Bob wanted $2.3 million. I countered with $2.1 million, plus my commitment to consult for the first year, helping maintain client relationships, ensuring smooth transition, preserving the company culture he'd built. "Your expertise is worth something," I said, "but mine is too. 42 years in this business. I know every major developer in Colorado, half the building inspectors, and enough contractors to staff 3 firms. That network, that experience, it has value beyond money." Bob considered this. "You're not wrong. And honestly, knowing you'd be guiding the ship for the first year, that gives me peace of mind. Then we have a deal?" He extended his hand. "We have a deal. The financing was the hard part. I met with my banker the next day, a woman named Lisa Chen, who'd handled my accounts for 15 years. I laid out my assets, $890,000 in retirement accounts, $650,000 in stocks and bonds, the cabin worth approximately $900,000 with current market values. "You want to leverage all of this?" Lisa asked, concerned. "Walter, this is your entire safety net. I know what I'm doing." "Do you? Because if anything goes wrong—" "It won't." She looked at me for a long moment. "This isn't just business, is it?" I met her eyes. "It's the best business opportunity I've had in years. Alpine Design Group is profitable, well managed, with excellent growth potential. The numbers work." "The numbers barely work," she corrected. "You'll be extended thin. 1 bad quarter and—" "Lisa, I need you to trust me on this." She sighed, pulled out the loan applications. "You're liquidating your stock portfolio?" "Yes." "Taking a home equity line against the cabin? At your age, with fixed income?" "Yes." "And you're absolutely certain about this?" I thought about Trevor's face that night at dinner. The contempt. the certainty that he could push me around. Completely certain. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Liquidating investments, processing loan applications, setting up the new LLC, Harrison Architectural Holdings, to purchase Alpine Design Group. David Stewart handled the legal aspects, making sure everything was airtight. "This is a big swing," David said during one of our meetings. "If you're doing this because of your son-in-law—" "I'm doing this because it's a sound investment," I interrupted. "The fact that Trevor works there is incidental." David raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, the situation deteriorated exactly as I'd predicted. Richard and Patricia Cooper continued their entitled behavior, seemingly convinced that rules were suggestions meant for other people. More smoking on the deck, more loud parties that went past quiet hours. They invited friends up from California for a week. 8 people staying in my 3-bedroom cabin, sleeping on couches and air mattresses, treating the place like a free resort. I documented everything. The security cameras I'd installed captured it all in high definition. Every cigar Richard lit. Every time Patricia rearranged my furniture. Every guest who exceeded the occupancy limits. The penalties accumulated. By the time I sent the second official notice through David, the total had reached $4,300. That's when Richard damaged my antique cabinet. I'd built it myself 5 years ago from wood, salvaged from a 100-year-old barn outside Boulder. Cherry wood, hand-fitted joints, no nails or screws, just craftsmanship and patience. It had taken me 3 months of careful work. Patricia knocked it over while redecorating the living room. The corner splintered, a door came off its hinges, the finish scratched. The camera footage showed it clearly, Patricia pushing it aside to make room for some gaudy lamp she'd brought from home, the cabinet tipping, crashing to the floor. She looked at it for a moment, then just walked away. I stood in my workshop, watching the footage, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. That cabinet represented hours of meditation, of careful work, of creating something beautiful with my own hands, and she destroyed it like it was garbage. I called David. "Add property damage to the complaint," I said. "Estimated replacement value, $1,500 for materials and labor." "Walter, are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure. File it." The total penalties now exceeded $8,700. When David sent the updated notice, Richard called him directly, screaming about harassment and extortion. David, professional as always, simply said, "You're welcome to consult your own attorney about the validity of the contract. We'll see you in court, if necessary." Richard hung up and called Trevor. I knew because Trevor showed up at my workshop the next afternoon, his face purple with rage. "You've lost your mind," he shouted, slamming my workshop door open. $8,000. For what? I was sanding that jewelry box again, the wood smooth under my fingers. Didn't look up. For violations of a legally binding contract. The itemized list is in the notice. Nobody takes these petty rules seriously. Now I looked at him, set down my sandpaper carefully. The law takes them seriously. Courts take them seriously. Contracts aren't suggestions, Trevor. You should know that. You studied law before you switched to architecture. His hands clenched into fists. This is about revenge, about that dinner. This is about property rights and contract enforcement. You can't possibly believe... I believe what the documented evidence shows. Your parents signed a rental agreement with specific terms. They've violated those terms repeatedly. The penalties are clearly stated in the contract they signed. I picked up my sandpaper again. You reviewed that contract yourself before they signed it. If you thought the terms were unreasonable, that was the time to object. My parents are family. Your parents are tenants with a legal obligation they're refusing to honor. Trevor leaned over my workbench, trying to intimidate me with his height, his presence. You think you're clever. You think you've got this all figured out. But you're just a bitter old man trying to hurt his own daughter. I met his eyes without flinching. I think I'm a property owner protecting his rights. And Trevor, your father said I could sue him if I wanted. So I am. David filed the complaint this morning. Summit County Court. Your parents will be served by the end of the week. The color drained from his face. You're actually suing them? For breach of contract, property damage, and collection of penalties clearly stated in the agreement. Yes. Danielle will never forgive you. That hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I kept my voice steady. That's her choice to make. But maybe you should think about what she'll never forgive you for, like the night you screamed at her father to get out of his own home. Trevor stood there, breathing hard, his mind clearly racing through options, scenarios, ways to fight back. Finally, he turned and walked out, without another word. I went back to my sanding, but my hands were shaking slightly. This was it, the point of no return. The lawsuit was filed. The acquisition of Alpine Design Group was moving forward. In a few weeks, maybe a month, everything would come together, and Trevor had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him. My phone rang that evening. Danielle. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with tears. "How can you do this? How can you sue Trevor's parents? This is family." "Danielle, when Trevor told me to get out of my own home, where were you?" Silence. "When he screamed at me across my dinner table in front of you, what did you do?" "Dad, you sat there, silent. You chose his side without saying a word. He's my husband, and I'm your father, the one who raised you alone after your mother passed, the one who paid for your education, your wedding, who supported you through everything, and when it mattered, you stayed silent." "This isn't about respect," she sobbed. "This is about you being vindictive." I looked out at the mountains, dark against the evening sky. "No, Danielle. This is about consequences. Trevor thought he could push me around. Your in-laws thought they could ignore basic respect and legal obligations. I'm showing them they were wrong. I hate you for this," she whispered. That cut deep, deeper than anything. "That's your right," I said quietly, "but I won't be disrespected in my own home. Not by Trevor, not by his parents, and not by you." She hung up without another word. I sat there on my porch, phone in hand, wondering if I'd just destroyed the most important relationship in my life. Then I thought about the cabin deal closing, about Trevor finding out who his new boss was going to be. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. The deal closed on a Tuesday morning in late June. I sat in a conference room in downtown Denver, surrounded by lawyers and accountants and stacks of paperwork that represented every dollar I'd saved over 42 years of work. Bob Dennis sat across from me, pen in hand, looking both relieved and a little sad. "You'll take care of it?" he asked one final time. "Like it's my own child," I promised. We signed, shook hands. And just like that, I owned Alpine Design Group, $890,000 from my retirement accounts, $650,000 from selling my investment portfolio, $560,000 borrowed against my cabin at 4.2% interest. Every penny I had, plus debt that would take years to pay off. The lawyers handling the transaction had one critical instruction: complete confidentiality until the official announcement. Standard practice for business acquisitions. Prevents chaos. Allows for smooth transition. Bob would stay on for 2 weeks to help with the handover, then make the announcement before heading to Arizona. Trevor had no idea his father-in-law had just become his boss. I drove back to Breckenridge that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly. Too much was broken for that. But purposeful. Clear. I knew exactly what I was doing and why. The cabin situation reached its breaking point that same week. Richard, emboldened by his refusal to pay the penalties, decided to throw what he called a mountain house warming party for his friends from California. I found out because Patricia posted about it on social media. Photos of her setting up decorations, captions about our beautiful Colorado retreat. Our retreat? Like they owned it. The party was scheduled for Saturday night. I considered my options, then called David. "File for immediate injunctive relief," I said. "They're planning a major gathering in violation of the rental agreement. I want it stopped." "Walter, the court date is already scheduled for next month. We can address everything then. I want them out before they destroy more of my property." David sighed. "I'll see what I can do." Saturday arrived. I watched from my workshop as cars began pulling up around 5 p.m. I counted 12 vehicles, probably 30-plus people, based on the occupancy I could see through the windows. The music started at 6. By 7, it was loud enough to hear a quarter-mile away. By 8, people were smoking on my deck, drinking on my porch, throwing trash in my yard. I documented everything, every face, every vehicle, every violation. At 9 p.m., I called the Summit County Sheriff. I'd like to report a noise violation and trespassing, I said calmly. I have rental tenants who are violating their lease agreement and disturbing the peace. 2 deputies arrived around 9:30. I met them at the road, showed them the rental agreement, explained the situation. They were professional, sympathetic. How many people are supposed to be there? One asked. Maximum 4, per the signed contract. He looked at the line of cars, the noise carrying through the mountain air. That's way more than 4. They knocked on the door. Richard answered, drink in hand, music blaring behind him. The conversation was brief. Richard tried his usual entitled routine. Do you know who I am? And this is family property. But the deputies weren't impressed. Sir, you're in violation of your rental agreement and the noise ordinance. You need to end this gathering immediately. This is ridiculous. I'm not... Now, sir, or we'll cite everyone here for trespassing on private property. The party broke up within the hour. Cars streaming down the mountain road, drunk guests complaining loudly, Richard and Patricia humiliated in front of their friends. I watched from my workshop window, a cup of coffee in hand. Beautiful. Trevor called me the next morning, his voice shaking with rage. You called the cops on my parents? I called law enforcement about a violation of a rental agreement and noise ordinance. Yes. They were humiliated. Their friends were trespassing on my property in violation of a signed contract. Trevor, this is simple. They agreed to terms. They're not following them. Actions have consequences. This is insane. What's insane is thinking you can scream at someone in their own home and face no consequences. What's insane is your parents destroying property they don't own and expecting no accountability. He hung up. I went back to my coffee. The next week, David called with news. The court date is set, 3 weeks from now, and Walter, they don't have a lawyer. Seriously? Richard tried to represent himself initially, then called a few attorneys. Nobody wants to touch it. The contract is ironclad. The violations are documented with video evidence, and they don't have a legal leg to stand on. Any lawyer who looked at it probably told them to settle. But they won't settle. Nope. Richard is convinced he'll win because family. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The 3 weeks crawled by. Richard and Patricia stayed in the cabin, probably hoping I'd back down. They'd stopped throwing parties, but the smaller violations continued. Richard's cigars, Patricia's furniture rearranging, the general contempt for my property. The total penalties were now approaching $9,000. During those weeks, I also had meetings at Alpine Design Group. Bob was introducing me to key staff, major clients, reviewing ongoing projects. Everyone assumed I was just a consultant helping with the transition. Trevor saw me a few times in the office, confusion flickering across his face, but he didn't ask questions. Probably assumed Bob had hired me temporarily. I kept my mouth shut, smiled, learned the business from the inside. The court date finally arrived on a Thursday in late August. I dressed carefully that morning, good suit, nothing flashy, the image of a responsible property owner protecting his rights. David met me at the Summit County Courthouse, his briefcase full of documentation. Ready? He asked. Absolutely. We entered the courtroom. Richard and Patricia were already there, sitting with Trevor and Danielle. My daughter looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed. She glanced at me once, then looked away. That hurt, but I'd known it would. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Margaret Chen, reviewed the case file before addressing us. This is a civil complaint regarding rental agreement violations and property damage. Mr. Stewart, you're representing the plaintiff? Yes, Your Honor. Harrison Mountain Retreats, LLC, owned by Walter Harrison. And the defendants are representing themselves? Richard stood up. Yes, Your Honor. This whole thing is a misunderstanding. We're family and... Sir, please sit down. You'll have your chance to speak. Judge Chen reviewed the complaint, the rental agreement, the penalty clauses. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw her eyebrows raise slightly when she read the detailed violation list. Mr. Stewart, present your case. David was masterful. He laid out the timeline, the signed contract, the clear violation terms. Then he presented the evidence, video footage of Richard smoking, of Patricia rearranging furniture, of the massive party, photos of the damaged cabinet, copies of warning letters that were ignored. Richard's face got redder with each piece of evidence. When it was his turn, Richard stood up and started talking about family obligations, about being treated unfairly, about how the contract was unreasonable. Judge Chen stopped him. "Mr. Cooper, did you sign this rental agreement?" "Yes, but—" "Did you read it before signing?" "Well, yes, but nobody actually—" "Nobody actually what? Expects you to follow rules?" Her tone was sharp. "This is a legally binding contract. You signed it. The terms are clearly stated. The evidence shows repeated, documented violations. But he's my son-in-law's father. This is family property." "This is rental property, owned by an LLC. Family relationship doesn't negate contractual obligations." Richard tried to argue more, but Judge Chen had clearly seen enough. "I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff," she said firmly. "Defendants are ordered to pay $8,700 in documented penalties, plus $3,200 in court costs and attorney fees. Payment due within 30 days. Additionally, defendants must vacate the property within 14 days. Richard's face went from red to purple. "This is outrageous. That's our grandson's grandfather. You're destroying a family." Judge Chen looked at him coldly. "You destroyed your own situation by refusing to honor a contract you signed. Court is adjourned." She stood and left. Richard turned to me, his face contorted with rage. "You vindictive old bastard. You'll regret this." Trevor put a hand on his father's shoulder, trying to calm him, but Richard shook him off. Patricia, who'd been quiet throughout, finally spoke. $11,900. "You're demanding nearly $12,000 from us." "I'm enforcing a contract you signed," I said calmly, gathering my documents. "A contract that clearly stated the terms and penalties." "You've ruined everything," Patricia said, her voice shaking. "Trevor's relationship with Danielle, our family, all of it." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "You ruined it when you treated my home with contempt, when you dismissed my work as rustic and dated, when you acted like rules don't apply to people like you." I walked toward the exit. Danielle was standing by the door, tears streaming down her face. We stopped, facing each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she whispered. I wanted to tell her I loved her, that I was doing this to protect myself, not to hurt her, that someday she'd understand. Instead, I just said, "I hope someday you remember who stayed silent when it mattered." And I walked past her, out of the courthouse, into the bright Colorado sunshine. David caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was tough," he said. "Yeah. You okay?" I thought about the cabin I'd reclaimed, about Alpine Design Group, waiting for the official announcement, about Trevor, who still had no idea what was coming. "I'm fine," I said. "This is just the beginning." 2 weeks later, I walked into Alpine Design Group as its owner. Bob Dennis had scheduled the announcement for mid-morning, gathering the entire staff in the main conference room. 32 employees, ranging from junior drafters to senior architects like Trevor. They filtered in, looking curious but relaxed. Ownership changes in architecture firms aren't unusual, and Bob had assured everyone their jobs were safe. I arrived with David Stewart and the company's accountant, Sarah Kim, who'd been handling the financial transition. We stood in the hallway outside the conference room, waiting for Bob to introduce us. Through the glass wall, I could see Trevor sitting near the front, arms crossed, looking impatient. He'd noticed me around the office over the past few weeks, but probably assumed I was just consulting on the transition. Why would his father-in-law, the simple retired architect, be anything more than a temporary advisor? Bob stepped to the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "As you know, I've decided to retire and sell the firm. It wasn't an easy decision, but I'm confident I've found the right buyer. Someone who understands our values, respects our culture, and has the expertise to lead us forward." He gestured toward the door. "Please welcome the new owner of Alpine Design Group." I walked in. The room went silent. Eyes found me, registered recognition, confusion. I saw colleagues I'd worked with decades ago, younger architects who knew my reputation, and Trevor, sitting there in his expensive suit, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and then as understanding hit, pure shock. His face went white. Actually white, like someone had drained the blood right out of him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. I walked to the front of the room, calm and professional. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Walter Harrison. As Bob mentioned, I'm the new owner of this firm. The acquisition was finalized in late June through Harrison Architectural Holdings, and I'm honored to continue the legacy Bob built here." Trevor's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. His knuckles were white. I continued. "I want to assure all of you that my goal is growth and stability. I've spent 4 decades in this business, and I understand that a firm's strength comes from its people. Each of you will have the opportunity to demonstrate your professionalism and contribute to our success." My eyes moved across the room, landing briefly on Trevor. "I'll be conducting performance reviews with all senior staff over the next 3 months. These will be thorough professional assessments based on project outcomes, client satisfaction, and adherence to budgets and timelines. Everyone will be evaluated on merit." Trevor's face had progressed from white to a blotchy red. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. "Bob will remain as a consultant for the transition period," I said. "For those of you who want to discuss anything about the change in ownership, my door's open. We'll be scheduling individual meetings over the coming weeks." I paused, making eye contact with Trevor again. "Trevor Cooper, I'd like to speak with you first. Please come to my office after this meeting concludes." The room buzzed with quiet conversation as people processed the news. Some looked pleased, others uncertain. Trevor sat frozen, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. I finished the presentation, thanked everyone for their attention, and walked to what was now my office, Bob's old space with its view of downtown Denver and the mountains beyond. David joined me, closing the door. "That was interesting," he said quietly. "Trevor looked like he'd been hit by a truck." "He's starting to understand the situation he's in. You know he's going to fight this. Let him try." 15 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. "Come in." Trevor entered, and I could see he'd used those 15 minutes trying to compose himself. His face was still flushed, but he'd straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat, his posture rigid. His hands kept moving, adjusting his cuffs, touching his tie, gripping the armrests. Nervous tells he probably didn't realize he was showing. I opened a folder on my desk, his personnel file. "Trevor Cooper, senior architect, salary of $156,000 per year, 5 years with the firm." I looked up at him. "Your work is generally competent. The Harrison Tower project you led was well executed. The Meadowbrook development came in on budget and ahead of schedule." He blinked, clearly not expecting praise. "However," I continued, "there are concerns. The Richardson retail complex, 3 weeks behind schedule. The Summit Plaza project, $47,000 over budget. 2 written client complaints in the past 12 months about communication and responsiveness." His face hardened. "Those were extenuating circumstances. The Richardson delay was due to permit issues with the city, not my timeline management. Summit Plaza had unforeseen structural challenges that required—" "I've read the reports," I interrupted calmly. "Some of your explanations are valid. Others indicate planning failures. Either way, as the new owner, I'm conducting comprehensive performance reviews of all senior architects over the next 3 months. You'll be evaluated on the same criteria as everyone else. Based on those results, I'll make decisions about continued employment and compensation." "You bought this company to get revenge on me," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "This is about the cabin. This is about running a profitable business," I said, meeting his eyes. "Your personal relationship to me is irrelevant. What matters is your professional performance. Nobody will believe that. They don't have to believe anything. They just have to work professionally. Can you do that, Trevor? Can you separate your personal feelings from your professional responsibilities?" He stared at me, breathing hard through his nose. I could see the wheels turning, his mind racing through options, scenarios, escape routes, finding none. "Do you have any questions about your job responsibilities?" I asked. His hands were trembling slightly. He clenched them into fists. "No," he said through gritted teeth. "Then you're dismissed. I'll schedule your formal review in the coming weeks." He stood up, nearly knocking over the chair, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. "You're destroying my family," he said quietly, not looking at me. No, I said. I'm protecting my dignity and my rights. You destroyed your own situation the moment you screamed at me to get out of my own home. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat there for a moment, looking out at the Denver skyline. Then I pulled out my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Danielle. A text message. What did you do? I didn't respond. She'd find out soon enough. David came back an hour later. The staff is talking, he said. Everyone knows Trevor is your son-in-law. They're trying to figure out if this is personal or business. What do you think they'll conclude? That it's both, but as long as you're professional, they'll accept it. This business runs on results, not family drama. He was right. Architecture is a meritocracy. Good work speaks for itself. My phone rang. Richard Cooper. I almost didn't answer. Then I decided to. Walter, Richard said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. I heard about your big acquisition. Congratulations. Thank you. Must have cost you everything you had. Your retirement savings, your investments. I hear you even borrowed against that cabin. My finances are my business. Of course. I'm just saying. It's a risky move for a man your age. 1 bad quarter, and you could lose everything. I smiled. Is that a threat, Richard? Just an observation. Businesses fail all the time, especially when owners get distracted by personal matters. I appreciate your concern, I said dryly. Was there something else? Just wanted to let you know. We'll be out of your cabin by the deadline. We're paying the court judgment. But this isn't over, Walter. Trevor is family. We protect our own. So do I said, and hung up. I sat there thinking about that conversation. Richard was right about one thing. I was extended thin financially. The business had to succeed. One serious mistake, one major client loss, and I could be in trouble. But I'd built my entire career on careful planning and solid execution. I wasn't worried. That evening I drove back to Breckenridge. The cabin felt different now, not just mine again, but reclaimed, won back through legal means and sheer determination. I sat on my porch with a bourbon, watching the sun set over the mountains, thinking about everything that had happened. 3 months ago I'd been a retired architect, looking forward to peace and quiet. Now I owned a multi-million-dollar firm, had won a lawsuit against my in-laws, and held my son-in-law's career in my hands. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like war. And I had a feeling the hardest battles were still to come. Trevor didn't come to work the next day, or the day after that. On the 3rd day, he called in sick. His administrative assistant, a woman named Jennifer, who'd been with the firm for years, looked uncomfortable when she told me. Is he actually sick? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know, Mr. Harrison. He sounded stressed. If he needs personal time, he should request it properly, through official channels. Yes, sir. But I knew what was happening. Trevor was hiding, trying to figure out his next move. And I was right, because that evening he went to the cabin. I knew because Richard called me. We need to talk, Richard said. All of us. You, me, Patricia, Trevor. Let's settle this like adults. There's nothing to settle. The court made its ruling. You have a payment deadline. Walter, please. We're family. Surely we can work something out. I thought about it, considered refusing, but curiosity won. Fine. Tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. Your cabin, or rather my cabin that you're occupying for another week. We'll be there. I showed up at exactly 6 p.m. the next day. Richard and Patricia were waiting, along with Trevor. Danielle sat in the corner, her eyes red from crying. Thank you for coming, Richard said, trying to sound magnanimous, like he was doing me a favor. You have 20 minutes, I said, remaining standing. Then I'm leaving. Patricia spoke up, her voice carefully modulated. Walter, we've been talking. We realize this situation has gotten out of hand. We'd like to propose a settlement. I'm listening. We'll pay half the judgment, Richard said. $5,000. In exchange, you drop the rest of the penalties and let us stay another month to properly arrange our California move. I almost laughed. You want me to accept half of what you legally owe, plus give you more time and property you've disrespected? It's a reasonable compromise. No. What's reasonable is honoring the court judgment, full payment out by the deadline. Trevor stood up, his face flushed. You're doing this because you hate me, because I married Danielle. Because you can't stand that she chose someone successful? I'm doing this because you told me to get out of my own home, I said calmly. Because your parents treated my property like a dump. Because not one of you showed an ounce of respect or gratitude. We tried to make this work, Patricia said, her voice rising. But you were impossible. Those ridiculous rules, those petty fines, those legally binding contract terms that you signed, I interrupted. You keep acting like the rules don't apply to you. Like you're special. You're not. Richard's face darkened. Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's talk about Alpine Design Group. You mortgaged everything to buy that company. What happens when Trevor's projects start failing? When clients start leaving? When word gets out that the owner is running a personal vendetta? There it was. The threat I'd been waiting for. Are you saying Trevor plans to sabotage his own projects? I asked mildly. I'm saying accidents happen. Projects go wrong. Clients get unhappy. I looked at Trevor. Is that your plan? Tank your own career to hurt me? Trevor looked away, jaw clenched. Because here's the thing, I continued. I spent 42 years building my reputation. I know every major client in this market. I know their needs, their preferences, their concerns. You think they'll believe you're suddenly incompetent? Or will they wonder why Trevor Cooper, who's been solid for 5 years, suddenly can't deliver? I walked toward the door, then turned back. You want to fight dirty? Go ahead. But understand, I've got documentation of every project, every budget, every timeline. If things start failing mysteriously, I'll know why. And I'll have evidence for wrongful termination claims that will protect me legally while destroying your reputation permanently. You can't prove anything, Richard said. I don't have to. Suspicion is enough in this industry. Once word gets out that Trevor Cooper sabotages projects when he doesn't get his way, who will hire him? The room fell silent. Danielle finally spoke, her voice small. Dad, please, this has to stop. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to her husband and whatever remained of her relationship with me. Danielle, I love you, I said quietly, but I won't be disrespected. Not by Trevor, not by his parents, not by anyone. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about what happened, about how Trevor treated me, about how you stayed silent, I'll be here. But until then, this is a legal matter, not a family one. I left them there and drove back to my cabin. The next few days were tense. Trevor returned to work, but he was a shadow of his former cocky self. He came in early, left late, didn't make eye contact with me in the hallways. I conducted my first senior architect review with Jennifer's help, pulling project files, client feedback, budget reports, everything documented and professional. Then a week after the deadline, Richard paid, the full amount, $11,900, transferred to my account with no communication beyond the bank notification. 2 days later, they moved out of the cabin. I went there after they left. The place was a mess, not destroyed, but clearly not cared for. Dishes in the sink, trash overflowing, my furniture shoved against walls. But they were gone. I spent that weekend cleaning, putting everything back where it belonged, restoring my sanctuary to what it had been. Almost what it had been. Some things can't be fully restored. The following Monday, I began Trevor's official performance review. I sat in my office going through his project files with meticulous care. The Richardson project delay, I found emails showing Trevor had been warned about potential permit issues, but hadn't followed up promptly. His fault. The Summit Plaza budget overrun, structural problems that could have been caught in initial planning with more thorough site analysis. Also, his fault. The client complaints, both from the same client, who'd complained about Trevor's dismissive attitude when they raised concerns. Absolutely his fault. Everything documented. Everything provable. I could fire him. Legally, professionally, with complete justification. But I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to understand. To change. So instead, I scheduled a meeting. Trevor came into my office looking like a man walking to his execution. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he sat down. I've completed your performance review, I said. He said nothing, just waited. Your work shows both strengths and significant weaknesses. The weaknesses are concerning, particularly the pattern of poor communication and inadequate planning that has led to delays and overruns. His hands gripped the chair arms. However, I continued, I also see potential. When you focus and apply yourself properly, you're capable of excellent work. The Harrison Tower project proves that. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. So here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm putting you on a performance improvement plan. 2 months. You'll work directly with Senior Project Manager Susan Chen, who'll mentor you on planning and client communication. You'll have specific targets, on-time delivery, budget adherence, client satisfaction scores. I slid a document across the desk. Meet these targets and you keep your position. Fail and we'll discuss other options. This is your opportunity to prove you're the architect I believe you can be. He stared at the document, then at me. Why? He asked hoarsely. Why are you giving me a chance? I thought about that, about Danielle, about the man my son-in-law could be if he dropped the entitlement and arrogance. Because everyone deserves a chance to do better, I said, even you. He left my office without another word, the improvement plan in his hands. I sat there afterward, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Time would tell. But at least now, finally, everyone knew where they stood. The rules applied to everyone. The consequences were real. And respect wasn't optional. It was earned. Whether Trevor learned that lesson was up to him. Richard and Patricia Cooper left the cabin on the deadline day, their Mercedes packed so full I could see boxes pressing against the windows. I watched from my workshop as they loaded the last items, Richard's face set in a permanent scowl, Patricia looking years older than when they'd arrived. They didn't say goodbye. Just drove away, gravel crunching under their tires, leaving a cloud of dust that settled slowly in the mountain air. The bank notification came through that afternoon. $11,900. Full payment of the court judgment. No message, no acknowledgement, just the money they owed. I walked through the cabin after they left. It was worse than I'd expected. Not destroyed, but clearly not cared for. Stains on the furniture I'd built by hand. Scratches on the hardwood floors. The damaged cabinet leaning sadly against the wall where Patricia had knocked it over. But it was mine again. Fully, completely mine. I spent the weekend restoring it, piece by piece. Cleaned every surface, repaired what I could, made notes on what needed replacing. By Sunday evening, it looked like home again. Almost. Some things can't be fully restored. The cabinet would never be quite the same. The scratches in the floor would always be there, faint reminders of people who didn't respect what I'd built. But I'd won. Legally, completely, justifiably. At work, Trevor was unraveling. I didn't need to do anything dramatic. I just stayed professional, evaluating his work with the same standards I applied to everyone else. But the stress of knowing I held his career in my hands was eating him alive. He came in early, stayed late, double-checked every detail. His projects started improving. Deadlines met, budgets held, clients satisfied. Exactly what I'd hoped the performance improvement plan would achieve. But the fear in his eyes every time he saw me in the hallway told me he wasn't learning the right lesson. He wasn't working better because he'd grown as a professional. He was working better because he was terrified. That wasn't sustainable. 3 weeks after the court judgment, I conducted his formal performance review. He came to my office looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually impeccable suit rumpled, hands shaking as he sat down. I laid out his files across the desk. Recent projects, client feedback, budget reports. Trevor, I said calmly, we need to discuss your performance over the past month. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I know the Richardson project had issues, but I've been working to... The Richardson project is actually performing well now, I interrupted. You identified the permit delays early, communicated with the client proactively, and adjusted the timeline appropriately. That's exactly what I want to see. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. What? The Meadowbrook residential development. Ahead of schedule, under budget. The client specifically praised your communication and attention to detail. I slid the feedback form across the desk. You're capable of excellent work when you apply yourself. His mouth opened, closed. No words came out. However, I continued, I'm concerned about your stress levels. You're working 70-hour weeks, showing signs of burnout. That's not sustainable for you or beneficial for the firm. I'm fine, he said quickly. I can handle it. Can you? Or are you just terrified I'm going to fire you? Silence. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. Trevor, I'm not your enemy. I'm your boss. There's a difference. I leaned back in my chair. You're a talented architect. The work you're doing now proves that. But you're doing it out of fear, not passion. That needs to change. How? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How am I supposed to not be afraid when I bought the company you work for, when I successfully sued your parents, when I showed you that actions have consequences? He looked down at his hands. Trevor, I didn't do any of this to destroy you. I did it to protect myself and demand the respect I deserve. You can keep working here, keep building your career, keep supporting my daughter. But only if you understand that respect isn't optional, it's required. What if I can't give you that? He asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. Then you should find another job. I'll even provide a good reference based on your recent work. But if you stay, we work together professionally. No personal grudges, no fear-based performance, just mutual respect and good architecture. He sat there for a long moment, processing. Then so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I don't know if I can do that. Then figure it out, I said. You have 2 months to decide. Keep performing well, and we'll reassess at the end of that period. If you want to stay, we move forward professionally. If not, we part ways amicably. He left my office without another word. That evening, Danielle called. First time since the courthouse. Dad, she said, her voice small. Can we talk? I'm listening. Trevor told me about the review, about what you said. I waited. He came home and he broke down, completely. Started crying, saying he'd ruined everything, that he didn't know how to fix it. She paused. I've never seen him like that. What do you want from me, Danielle? I don't know. I'm scared. Scared he'll lose his job. Scared our marriage is falling apart. Scared I've lost you. I looked out at the mountains, dark against the evening sky. You haven't lost me, I said, but you can't have it both ways. You can't support Trevor when he disrespects me, then expect me to just forget it happened. I know, her voice cracked. I know I was wrong. That night at dinner, I should have stood up for you. I should have told Trevor he was out of line. But I didn't, and I'm sorry. Those words, the ones I'd been waiting months to hear. Why didn't you? I asked. Because I was scared of him too, of his anger, of disappointing him, of not being good enough for his family. I let him change me into someone I don't recognize. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that admission. What are you going to do about it? I asked. I don't know yet, but I can't keep living like this, caught between you and him, never standing up for anything, just trying to keep everyone happy. Then stop trying to keep everyone happy. Figure out what you believe is right and stand up for it. Even if it means choosing between you and Trevor. Especially then. She was quiet for a long moment. Can I come see you? Tomorrow? You still have a key, I said. You're always welcome. Just me? Just you. After she hung up, I sat on my porch with a bourbon, watching stars appear over the mountains. The cabin was quiet, except for the wind through the pines, and the distant sound of an owl hunting. Everything I'd fought for, the cabin, the company, my dignity, was secured. The legal battles were won. The financial risks were paying off as the firm continued to perform well under my leadership. But the hardest battle, the one with my daughter, was just beginning, and I had no idea how it would end. The next afternoon, Danielle's car came up the driveway. I was on the porch, working on a bird feeder I'd started weeks ago and never finished. She got out slowly, looking around like she was seeing the place for the first time. No Trevor, no defensive posture, just my daughter, looking lost and small in the mountain landscape. Hey, Dad, she said quietly. Hey, sweetheart. She came up on the porch, sat in the chair next to mine, and we sat in silence for a while, watching the blue jays fight over the old feeder. I remember when we built that together, she finally said. I was 7. You let me paint it purple and yellow, even though it was ugly. It wasn't ugly, it was creative. She smiled just a little. It was definitely ugly, but you hung it up anyway and told everyone it was beautiful. More silence, comfortable this time. I'm sorry, Dad, she said, for everything, for letting Trevor treat you like that, for not defending you, for choosing him over you when it mattered. I set down my tools, gave her my full attention. I forgive you, I said simply. She looked at me, tears starting to fall. Just like that? Just like that. You're my daughter, Danielle. I love you. That doesn't change because you made mistakes. But you've been so angry. I've been hurt, and I've been protecting myself. But angry at you? No. Disappointed, yes. Angry at Trevor for putting you in that position? Absolutely. But you're my daughter. That's forever. She broke then, really broke, crying in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. I pulled her into a hug and let her cry, my hand on her back the way I used to when she had nightmares. What do I do now? She asked when she could speak again. That's up to you. What do you want? I want my dad back. I want to be the person you raised me to be. I want to fix this. Then fix it. Not for me, for you. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. Trevor wants to apologize to you. Really apologize. Does he? Or does he want to keep his job? Both, probably, but Dad, he's changing. This whole thing broke something in him. The arrogance, the entitlement. He's actually listening to me now, actually seeing what he did wrong. Time will tell if that's real. Will you give him a chance to show you? I thought about that, about the man who'd screamed at me in my own home, about the possibility of redemption. If he wants to apologize, he knows where to find me, I said. But it has to be real, Danielle. Not just words, actions. She nodded. I'll tell him. We sat together until sunset, talking about small things, rebuilding the connection that had been fractured. When she left, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope? Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to being a family. But first, Trevor had to prove he'd really learned his lesson. 3 weeks later, I was in my office reviewing the quarterly financials when Jennifer buzzed my intercom. Mr. Harrison, Trevor Cooper's here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's personal. I checked my calendar. Send him in. Trevor entered looking different, not broken, but humbled. He wore a simple button-down and slacks instead of his usual expensive suit. His hair was less precisely styled. His whole demeanor was quieter. Walter, he said, thank you for seeing me. Sit down. He sat, hands folded in his lap. No nervous fidgeting, just stillness. I've been thinking about what to say to you for weeks, he began. Tried writing it down, practicing in the mirror, all of that. But nothing seemed right, because nothing can really undo what I did. I waited, saying nothing. I came to your home as a guest and treated you like you were beneath me. I screamed at you to get out of your own property. I let my parents disrespect your work, your life, everything you built. And worst of all, I put Danielle in a position where she had to choose between us. His voice was steady, but I could see the effort it took. I can't blame it on how I was raised, even though my parents taught me that money equals worth. I can't blame it on stress or circumstances. I made those choices. I was cruel and entitled and wrong. He met my eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for understanding. I'm just telling you that I know what I did was unforgivable, and I'm working every day to be better than that person. The silence stretched between us. What changed? I finally asked. Losing, he said simply. I've never really lost before, never faced real consequences. My parents always fixed things, always smoothed things over. But you didn't let them. You held me accountable, and it destroyed the illusion I'd built my whole life on. He leaned forward slightly. You gave me a performance improvement plan instead of firing me. You could have destroyed my career, ruined my reputation, made it impossible for me to work anywhere. But you didn't. You gave me a chance to prove I could do better. And have you? Done better? I'm trying. The Miller House project, I finished it early and under budget. Not because I was afraid, but because I actually cared about doing good work. The Greenfield development, I spent 3 hours on the phone with a frustrated client last week, really listening to their concerns instead of dismissing them. It felt good, like I was actually being useful instead of just important. I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. Found none. What do you want from me, Trevor? Nothing, he said. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About respect, about consequences, about everything. And I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not because it'll fix anything, but because you deserve to hear it. He stood up. I'll understand if you want me to find another job. Danielle said you'd give me a good reference. I appreciate that more than you know. Sit down, I said. He sat. I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer, his performance file from the past 2 months. The Miller House project, exceptional work. Client sent a personal thank you letter to the firm. The Greenfield development. You turned an angry client into someone who's now referring new business to us. Your billable hours are strong, your communication with the team has improved, and you haven't missed a single deadline. I slid the file across the desk. That's the work of someone who's not just scared of losing his job. That's the work of someone who's actually growing as a professional. His eyes widened slightly. I'm taking you off the performance improvement plan, I said. You've proven you can meet the standards. Welcome back to full senior architect status. Walter, But, I interrupted, understand this. The professional relationship we have now is built on mutual respect. You respect my position as owner. I respect your skills as an architect. We work together, effectively. That doesn't erase what happened, but it lets us move forward. He nodded slowly. Thank you. Truly. Don't thank me. You did the work. I just gave you the opportunity. As he stood to leave, I added, Danielle told me you wanted to apologize. I'm glad you did. But apologies are just words. Your actions over the past 2 months. That's what actually matters. I know, he said. And Walter, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you come to dinner at our place? Danielle really wants to cook for you. I thought about that, about my daughter, trying to rebuild bridges, about this man who'd humiliated me, now genuinely trying to change. Saturday work for you. The relief on his face was genuine. Saturday's perfect. After he left, I sat there looking out at the Denver skyline, thinking about everything that had happened since that dinner on my deck months ago. I'd won. Completely. The cabin was mine. The company was thriving. My dignity was restored. But more importantly, I'd proven something I'd known all along, but they'd forgotten. Respect isn't about money or status or social position. It's about character. Saturday evening, I drove to Danielle and Trevor's house in Denver. It was a nice place, not ostentatious, but comfortable. Trevor answered the door, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Genuine welcome, with no condescension. Walter, come in. Can I take your jacket? Danielle appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Dad! She hugged me, and it felt like it used to before everything went wrong. Dinner was simple, but good. Danielle had made pot roast, one of my favorites. We talked about work, about the cabin, about small things. No one mentioned the court case or the conflicts. We were just trying. Midway through dessert, Trevor set down his fork. Walter, I know I apologized at your office, but I want to say it here too, in front of Danielle. I was wrong. About everything. The way I treated you, the things I said, the position I put you in. I'm sorry, and I'm grateful you're giving me the chance to prove I can be better. Danielle reached over and took my hand. Dad, I'm sorry too. For not defending you, for letting things get so bad, for forgetting what you taught me about standing up for what's right. I looked at them both. These imperfect people who'd hurt me, but were now genuinely trying to make amends. I accept your apologies, I said. Both of you. But understand, this is a fresh start, not a clean slate. Trust is rebuilt through consistent action, not just words. We understand, Trevor said. Good. I smiled, the first genuinely warm smile I'd given them in months. Now who's going to help me with these dishes? We cleaned up together, the three of us, talking and even laughing a little. When I left that night, standing on their doorstep saying goodbye, Danielle hugged me tight. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Trevor extended his hand, and I shook it. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. Equal. Thank you, he said quietly, for not giving up on us. Family's complicated, I said, but it's worth fighting for. Just remember, respect is a two-way street. I won't forget again, he promised. Driving back to Breckenridge that night, windows down, mountain air flowing through the truck, I thought about everything that had happened. I'd lost sleep, spent money I couldn't afford to lose, risked relationships that mattered, but I'd also proven something important. You don't have to accept disrespect just because someone is family. You don't have to roll over just because someone else has money or status or connections. Sometimes the right thing to do is stand up, set boundaries, and let the consequences fall where they may. The cabin was dark when I arrived, but I didn't go inside right away. I sat on my porch with a bourbon, looking at the stars over the mountains, listening to the wind in the pines. My phone buzzed, a text from Danielle. "Thank you for giving us another chance. Love you, Dad." I smiled and typed back, "Love you too. See you next weekend for dinner at the cabin?" Her response came immediately. "We'll be there." I sat there a while longer, thinking about the bird feeder I needed to finish, the cabinet I needed to repair, the 100 small projects that filled my days now. The revenge, if that's what it was complete. The justice was served. But what mattered more was what came after. The slow, difficult work of rebuilding what was broken, of teaching lessons that stuck, of creating something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. True victory, I'd learned, wasn't about crushing your enemies. It was about establishing your worth, demanding respect, and creating a life where dignity was non-negotiable. I'd done that. And now, finally, I could enjoy the peace I'd moved to these mountains to find. The mountains stood silent and eternal above me, dark shapes against the star-filled sky. My cabin, truly mine now, waited behind me, ready to be the sanctuary I'd always wanted it to be. I finished my bourbon, stood up, and went inside. Tomorrow, I'd start on that bird feeder. Maybe Danielle would want to help. Maybe we'd make it purple and yellow again, ugly and beautiful in ours. The thought made me smile. Some things I'd learned can be restored after all. Not to what they were, but to something new and maybe even better. And that was enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.